Okay, hopefully you can all see that now. Great. So as I said, we're going to talk about explaining the EOSC Federation today. So what we're going to cover, first of all, just give an introduction to the EOSC Federation, show you what it's about, its aims and principles and so on, and then talk a bit about the governance structures, how it all works, the build-up phase context that we're currently in, going from initial work through to getting to production stage as well. And then we can have some question and answers as well. And as was said, if you do have questions as going along, put them in the chat and we'll try and come to those at the end, right? So first of all, for the Federation itself, so what is the European Open Science Cloud in general? Well, in a nutshell, it's trying to establish the European web of fair data and related services for research. So the idea is that with this, we have data that becomes easy to find, access, interoperate, and reuse, the fair part, okay? And this can be all research outputs, not just data, so that we can use that across boundaries, be those discipline boundaries, different sciences, be those between countries in Europe, so that we can make multi-country teams and usage as well, and put all those together to create this part of the European research area. And the benefit of doing this is to unlock the potential of the research data and outputs and help us accelerate discoveries and innovation, right? So it is to help the research, help the science itself, and help us have more impact and become more productive. One of the important things of doing that is how do we go about it, is ensuring that open science practices and skills become rewarded and taught, and they become the new norm. A lot of those are being promoted by your national or thematic funding agencies. So we're helping as providing a vehicle for doing that, and sort of enable the definition and adoption of standards and or necessary tools and services to allow this sharing of fair data and combining the results and so on. The point is as well, we're trying to establish a sustainable and federated infrastructure that allows us to do this. And that is the goal behind the EOSC Federation. It's not linked to any particular project. The intention is that it will be a long-living environment which can help researchers on their day-to-day work as well. So now what are the principles? So the vision, as we said, is to establish this web of fair data across Europe, right? And the way we're trying to do it is build it as a systems of systems approach. So we're very much aware that we're not starting from scratch. There are lots of existing very good systems out there, be them national or thematic, which merit to be brought together to establish this overall European web of fair data related services. So we're just trying to interconnect many of those things and add additional ones, okay? And it should be inclusive and accessible, so with low barriers to entry, hopefully ease of use from a user point of view and as a contributors, and make it for a broad participation. It's not restricted to a select few. We want to progressively make it larger and more accessible to everyone. It is community-driven and participatory. Much of the activities are co-design, co-development, co-decision-making, where the research communities participate in all those phases. And that we have to understand that in order for allow people to share their research output, their data and so on, it has to be a trustworthy and secure environment with well-defined governance structures in there. And that's the idea behind the governance models we have in place and the basic legislation and policies that are there as well. But it still has to remain flexible and adaptive. It's growing. It's not all the answers are known now. Additions will be brought in, changes will be made. So it's being done in an evolutionary approach based on the lessons learned. And already we're taking into account some of the lessons from the first wave of nodes that have joined. And of course, respecting the autonomy and control of the individual institutions. It's their data, it's their results and so on. It's not the EOS that owns it, it remains theirs. So we have to make sure that they retain full control of that and determine with whom they are willing to share those resources. Not everything is fully open. There may be some justifiable restrictions on what access there is to data and results, and those have to be respected as well. So we're looking for the broader engagement and transparency as well, making sure that people are well aware of why such decisions are being made and keep the stakeholders informed as we go through these key developments. So those are the basic principles. Now, as it started, if we look back, when did the Federation start? I think we can justifiably say it really started with the launch of the EOSC EU node, which was the first node. It was launched in October 2024. What does it do? Well, it provides access to EU-sponsored repositories, some of those collected by different EU agencies and so on. It also supports some of the federating capabilities, which are the glue, which holds the federation together and allows the interoperability work, things like the federated authorization authentication and the basic catalogs across the nodes as well. And it also does offer some horizontal services such as storage and compute, so on. And that has progressively grown over time since October 24. And last month, it was announced that it currently has more than 5,000 registered users. On the right of the slide, you can see the sort of services that are in there. First of all, the sort of the search function that goes through the catalogs and how you can look at the catalogs across the different nodes. It's not a very deep scientific search inside there. You can just look at the basic catalog context. It doesn't understand all the deep metadata, all the different disciplines, but at least gives you an overview of what's the sort of repositories and data sources are available there. And then there are a number of services are offered from the EU node. You can see them there, like bulk data transfer, virtual machines, and so on, which are accessible to all users once they are have a recognized identity, and we'll explain a little bit how that works. And so then they're given some virtual credits, which are given to anyone according to their affiliation and role. And so people can try out making use of some of these services and explore what it would mean to be an end user in the EOSC Federation. Okay. Now that was the first node. And of course, what happened then is we had a questionnaire was sent out to many potential contributors. There was 122 came back. Out of those, 50 or 60 were interested in forming a node in the Federation. Out of those with a dialogue, we ended up with the first 13 that became engaged during 2025. You can see them on this slide. They are a combination of national nodes like the Polish node, Slovakia, and Germany and so on. And then also some thematic nodes in different disciplines like PANOSC for physics, sciences, and engineering, but also the Life Science Connect node and DataTerra and so on, a range of those. And also an EU DAT as an e-infrastructure node. So there's a combination of 3 different types of nodes in there according to their focus, either national, thematic, or infrastructure. And of course, in the top right, you can see the European Commission's EOSC EU node there as well. So they have all joined. They're actively working. They federated together many of services and research product catalogs, data sources, and so on. And that continues to grow as they onboard more resources into each of the nodes. The total content of the Federation is progressively growing. You can find out more details about all of the nodes through their the website. The link there is at the bottom of this page. You see a few examples here of the sort of landing pages or home pages of some of those nodes. They show you the sort of different types of resources you can get access to via those nodes and the conditions under which they are accessible and so on. So I encourage you to explore those different websites and also to become involved and become registered as a user of the Federation. Now, with those nodes, they've been working on a number of scientific use cases which have been demonstrated starting in 2025. Each node was asked to nominate a number of or identify a number of scientifically relevant use cases. And a number of the nodes, of course, picked on the same sort of use case. And we now have multi-node use cases. That demonstrates the added value of the Federation. On this slide, we just show you a small number of them, 6 of them, just to show you examples that exist. They come from different disciplines, spanning from physics to life sciences, some of them using openly accessible data, some of them using data which has more restrictions on it because it's coming from life science domains and so on. But it just gives you a sensation of what are the types of things that can be done, but they're just a small selection. There are many more, and they're being added to all the while. And there are also now short promotional videos for some of those use cases. We have 3 of them already, which have the short videos. So the biological sequestration of carbon in the ocean. Similarly, for federating CERN's Rihanna pipeline, so the workflow management there as well, and also imaging data workflows on the Galaxy platform. So those all have now short promotional videos that explain what's happening in those use cases. The other 3 will also have videos appearing online in the coming weeks. So that gives you a general overview or feeling for those sort of things. So that's a sort of overview of it. So, and how is it governed? What structures are in place? Well, that's been built up over time. It's progressively becoming easier, as we refer to as the tripartite, become more aligned on what they expect out of the Federation and how we can work together. So here we see a picture taken from the symposium where the representatives of the tripartite came together on the stage, and the 3 parts of the tripartite, which is the overall governance model, governing body for the Federation, include the European Commission, and you can see that in the triangular form in the middle of the side. There's the European Commission, there's the EOSC Association, which represents the research communities with its more than 250 members and observers. It's bringing in the voice of those different research communities into the decision-making process at the highest level. And then in the yellow, we see as well the member states and associate countries, who are the major contributors to the EOSC Federation in terms of supporting the nodes, the data sets, the services, and so on that happened or developed with funding inside their countries. So collectively together, that represents the tripartite, and it has other structures below there. From the member states, we have the steering board, which involves all the European member states and associated countries as well for Horizon Europe. And then between the EOSC Association and the European Commission, there's a special partnership structure being put in place, and there's a partnership board put in place and operating there as well. So there you can see that that's the basic high-level structure we have. The quote at the top from Marc Lemaitre, also from the symposium last year, highlighted the strong and ongoing support from the European Commission for the European Open Science Cloud. And on the bottom right in the list, you can see the sort of things where this tripartite are involved, and it's color-coded. So the Horizon Europe funding is coming essentially from the European Commission and guided through the strategic research and innovation agenda that's put together by the association. You see the involvement in yellow, the commitments from all of the member states and associated countries, and that shows you how they're all contributing to the overall governance structure here as well. So it's looking not only at the Federation, but also the wider context as well. Now, we've gone further than that. That's the top level one. If you want the sort of strategic and political level, deeper down, that's been evolved in 2026 with the introduction of something referred to as the Memorandum of Understanding, specifically for the Federation. And we can see how that works. So in the right of this slide, in the pink box, you can see again a representation of the tripartite with the European Commission, member states, associated countries, and the EOSC Association. And the EOSC Association has been nominated by the tripartite with responsibility for overseeing the development of the Federation. So it's put in place a node coordinators committee where representatives of all the nodes, you showed you the nodes on the previous slide. They've all signed the MOU, the first wave nodes, and they're all represented in the Node Coordinators Committee. They've also set up a node operations committee for the day-to-day operations of it, again, populated by representatives from the first wave nodes. And then a series of working groups are being created and put in place and are operational for looking at specific technical or policy or legal aspects of the federation to help with its development. And you can see those on the left side of the slide. So they're either to do with the operations, and most of those report to the Node Operations Committee, different higher level capabilities, all the governance aspects as well. The ones in pink are already operational and their mandates have been endorsed by the Node Coordinators Committee. The ones in black are in preparation and have not yet been endorsed, and they may become online as the need for them becomes greater. So that's the basic federation governance structures. Let's take a look now at the build-up phase and what does that actually mean and what's involved in that. So first of all, remember we've talked a lot about nodes. So the nodes act as the entry points for end users to the entire EOSC federation. Through that, you can see potentially your most local or more natural environment in which you work, but they also give you an opportunity to get access to the resources across the other nodes as well. And they act as an organization that enrolls its activities in an EU node. So we talk about enrolling nodes and onboarding services and data repositories to nodes. So difference in technology. So it may not be the node may be hosting services and repositories from other organizations and other contributors as well. And it's composed of these FAIR data sets and or related services. It's a legal entity established in a European member state or associated countries that is responsible for the node, and it commits to comply with the set of common rules or regulations that defined by the federation. So those are the most general ones at the federation level, basically the rules of participation. It may have more specific rules for its own node, depending on what type of node it is and what restrictions it has. But there are general sets that are adhered to by all nodes. Okay. And we're gaining the input and the experience from these first wave nodes, the ones I showed you previously. That's being used to draft this first set of rules and regulations, and which they comply with as members of the federation. And you can see this minimum set of requirements that were agreed by the tripartite. Things are evolving, but it's the basic set we have there. You can see that on the website through the different tabs there as well. So those are the role of the nodes. And as we said, that we have this memorandum of understanding. Here you see a photo from the symposium last year, where the president of the EOSC Association, Klaus Tuchtermann, is signing the memorandum of understanding, bringing into existence the federation. And behind him are representatives of all the 13 EU nodes and the 13 nodes from the first wave and the EU node. And they have all progressively, over the few weeks that followed this signature process, they've all signed this MOU, so a part of the federation governance structure. Now, what's some of the lessons that we learned from this first round of enrollment of nodes? So first of all, it's very important to put in place a government structure that involves all the contributors to a node. Most of the nodes are not a single organization, but multiple organizations and multiple contributors, and they somehow have to all be involved in its governance of that individual node. And they have to ensure that the scope and the objectives of what they're trying to achieve with that node are collectively agreed, and there's not too much divergency. That sounds simpler than it really means. Everybody has their own intentions, and making sure they can work together as a group is quite a feat in itself. And that they have to make explicit the access policies for the services and the data repositories. It's something that some contributors have already thought of. Many others just say, well, it's open, but it's open to whom? To everybody, to only to your scientific discipline, to only your country, and those points have to be elaborated and clarified when setting up this sort of node as well. And then, of course, it's important, as we talked about earlier, the use cases, that each node identifies their scientifically relevant use cases so that they shows the value to your own communities. Then your own users realize why it's worth participating in the EOSC Federation. And of course, they need to develop a project plan, and that's been a part of the enrollment process that identifies the resources, not only human, because it's primarily a human activity, but also maybe some technical infrastructure is needed as well, that's needed to support and deploy the node on their behalf and keep it running over the long term. And then to actively participate in the Federation meetings and events to benefit from the shared experience. Many of the issues that the nodes are facing are common across the different nodes, and they can share and collectively improve together on their situations. So all of that has been picked up, it's been worked on, and there's the handbook, which has been put together by a body of volunteers that's been taken through 2 iterations now. We're now on version 2, which was revised in January of this year, taking into account the experience from those first set of nodes and becoming more precise. And it gives you an overview of the organizational and operational structure, what sort of services and characteristics in there. It's at a high level. It doesn't provide all the details. That's not the intention. But we have more specific documentation elaborating those details, which most of it you can find now through the EOSC Federation website. This handbook itself is published on Zenodo. You can find the DIY for it there. And it's a living document. We intend to update it later in the year to the next revision, and we will continue improving it over time. So what are we doing during 2026? Well, there were 3 main objectives agreed with the tripartite for what we want to achieve with the Federation during this year. And these are basically 3 main parts: looking at the operational structure, improving that, making a transition towards production, and also looking at the expansion beyond its first wave nodes and the contributions made there. So those were the 3 headline objectives for 2026. If we look at what does that mean to compare to where we were in 2025, so this transition from the prototype production will demonstrate the added value for the users and contributors. So the Federation will have more nodes. It already had some enrolled nodes, so we're adding more nodes. The governance was basically there, but now with the implementation of this governance from the memorandum of understanding, that becomes more enriched. And we've also adopted a standard, FITSM, an international standard for service management as well, and establishing key policies and improve the interoperability framework. That's being expanded with the experience that we've gathered up to now, and also input from the different projects are all contributing to the EOSC Federation. And also we have now in place the cybersecurity working group, which are putting together the cybersecurity policies, and the incident response team as well. And also demonstrating this cross-node utilization, so adding service monitoring and help desks, which are in the process of happening now. And that the users would be able to access more resources via the single sign-on and the common catalog. That's already in place for the first wave nodes. It'd be to extend it to all the nodes, and also getting the nodes to clarify their access policies for all of their resources. Make it possible to use virtual research environments. There are a number of them used by different disciplines. We're not going to have a single one. We will support a number of them across the different nodes, and expand that support as we go forward. And make it more easy to access machine actionable research data sets. So that means putting in place the high quality data sets and having better specifications about the machine readable aspects, such as the metadata in them, so that it can be harvested as easier. So the communities and stakeholders will, out of this, get more information. So again, updates to the handbook, better guidance on the node enrollment and resource onboarding. That is happening now with the second wave of nodes, which we'll come to in a few minutes. The information available to them is already more complete and more detailed compared to what was available for the first wave of nodes. And more use cases are coming, as I've mentioned already, from a diverse set of disciplines. Now, specifically on the operational structure, so we're migrating from the existing build-up group to the structures put in place with those working groups for the MOU. The node coordinators and node operations committee are already active. They're working now since a few months. The working groups, I've shown you those are operational as well. Co-chairs and the mandates are all been confirmed and agreed with the Node Coordinators Committee. The capabilities are evolving. We started with the federated authorization authentication and catalogs. We're now expanding beyond that, and I'll talk more about those as we go ahead. And that we're introducing this service monitoring and help desk integration, which will be of value to the end users as we move into production. So looking at those federating capabilities I mentioned, we have agreed with the nodes that we go from the original 2 federating capabilities are considered mandatory towards 5. And let's look at those now. So first of all, we had the federated authorization authentication, gives a single sign-on across all of the nodes in a seamless manner. That's based on My Access ID, supported by Xeon, and linked to EduGain. So we already have 6 of those nodes which are in a production-ready environment for the authorization and authentication infrastructure. We also have the EOSC catalogs put in place, so a listing of the catalogs provided by each node for their research outputs. There's more precision and more work going on around the service catalogs as well. Make sure that we have a common understanding of a definition of the service and have that can represented with aligned metadata. So those are still evolving there, but there are already a basic set of catalogs put in place, supported by the OpenAir knowledge graph through the EU node in the same manner to the federated AAI. The ones we're expanding on now is the introduction of the help desk, so high node level support, so integrating the different help desks across the different nodes, especially relevant when as a user you're making use of resources from another node which is not your home node, making sure that that's available and consistent. So the first wave nodes, they've all agreed to this. They've been consulted. We're looking at a basic evolutionary path for putting this in place. There's been information shared, and the guidelines are coming out for that this month. And then we're also looking at monitoring, the continuous service monitoring that will feed into federation-wide dashboards, so we can see from a contributor's point of view and from an end user's point of view, what is the status and availability, reliability, and so on of the different services across the federation. This is following the same approach we're using for the help desk. How do we have a federation level integrating with what's available in each of the nodes at the moment, and that's expected to come online during May and June this year as well. And then, as I mentioned, the service management system based on the FIST-SM standard, the training's already been put in place. The nodes are already working using this across the node operations committee, and it's becoming more and more elaborate in its usage and the way we manage the different services and the operational aspects of the federation. So these are progressively being adopted by all the nodes as part of this enrollment and as the transition towards production. We would expect to have this in place for a subset of nodes as we move in towards production. So about the production, the transition towards it, as I said, we're very much in a prototype at the moment. It basically works, but it hasn't got everything that's needed to say that we are in a production service for end users. We're working on those with those other federating capabilities and identifying the necessary steps and the implications for each node. They're not only technical, there are some legal requirements when we're exchanging information, potentially private data across the different nodes. Their responsibilities with respect to things like GDPR has to be understood and agreed, and those are being put in place as well with each of the nodes. Getting the schedule for the transition, they're not all moving at the same time. They have different aspects they have to address. So we also have to foresee the coexistence of both nodes in both prototype and production status within the federation and make sure that's addressed as well. And one of the other things that we're looking at is from the end user's point of view is establishing the academy, the first example we have here today, but also I'll talk a little bit later about establishing a user forum as well. So the other part of the objectives for 2026 was the expansion of the federation. So this basically means the enrollment of more nodes into the federation, but also onboarding of more resources and use cases to the nodes in the federation as well. So we have had to prepare a schedule for doing this, what resources are needed, use cases, and how we're doing it. And was mentioned earlier, we're leveraging some of the EOS Gravity cascading grants for that, and also those from some other projects like the Horizon Infra 2025-01 EOSC-01 projects that were announced earlier this year, which 4 projects were funded. We'll be working with those to see how they will contribute to the federation and the expansion as well, and building on the outcomes as well that happened at the winter school event in January of this year. So in terms of expansion, if you recall at the symposium last year, there was an announcement of the opening of these calls, the tripartite call, which is for the enrollment of new nodes, so our second wave of nodes. And that attracted 14 applicants by the deadline of the 18th of February. And then we had the cascading grants supported by the EOS Gravity project. First one to prepare preparatory grants, i.e. to become nodes in the future, not in the second wave, but in future waves. We got 20 applicants for that. And then the sort of inter-project grants, which are looking at onboarding new resources, services, and use cases onto existing nodes. And we received 24 applicants for those. So all of these calls were evaluated by externally appointed independent evaluators. The assessments were made and have been reviewed either by the Gravity Project for the second 2 calls or by the tripartite for the second wave. And I'll show you the results coming out of those now, the expansion. So first of all, for the second wave, the node enrollment, we're growing stronger because it was assessed that all 14 of the applicants were eligible and will join the federation. So what we will actually get are 14 new nodes, which give a wider geographical reach. So we have more national nodes, so covering more countries, including Czechia, Croatia, Latvia, North Macedonia, Sweden, Slovenia, Switzerland, and Turkey. We're also bringing on board more e-infrastructure nodes, with adding in capacity from existing pan-European e-infrastructures, notably GEON and the NRENs, EGI, and Scholarly Commons, where OpenAir is involved as well. And then expanding the scientific domains as well, with more thematic nodes from Metro Food, which is a research infrastructure for food quality agriculture, eBrains, research infrastructure for neuroscience as well. And then also the ENVRI node, which brings together 5 environmental research infrastructures at the S3 level as well. So all of those will be growing, being brought into the federation over the next 12 months, or the next 10 months, in fact, now. The enrollment is starting already. And they will bring on board 36 new use cases and more than 40 new services available to the users and platforms as well as 41 high-quality repositories for scientific outputs. There'll be links to 4 European common data spaces, the most popular one being the European Health Data Space. Also, many of these nodes have links to supercomputing centers, EuroHP centers, 7 of them, in fact, and a total of 20 S3 research infrastructures will be engaged in one manner or another for use cases or direct involvement of the nodes through this in scaling up of the federation. So we see that in the matter of basically 2 years, the federation will have grown to cover the majority of European member states, associated countries, as well as a large number of the scientific disciplines who will all be making contributions and making use and promoting their research outputs via the EOSC Federation. Now, what does it actually mean for when those nodes join? We've talked about the memorandum of understanding. So here you can see a link to the actual text of that memorandum of understanding for the operation of the EOS Federation. So there's 4 basic things they have to be able to do starting from now to get to a point where they can sign that memorandum of understanding and participate as full nodes within the federation. So they have to be enrolled technically in the testing environment, where they start with the federated authorization authentication and the federated catalogs. They will, of course, move on to the help desk and service monitoring and FitSM as well. We have to get an approval of the node name and entry into the node registry. It sounds simpler than it really is, coming up with a name that actually reflects the true scope of the country and is agreed by all the participants, might take a little bit more time than you think. They have to be enough information about them with their landing pages and information on the eos.eu website, and at least one of their use cases to be deployed. So once they've got to that stage, they can sign the MOU, and then they can participate as full members within the governance structure as well. Apart from the nodes, I also mentioned the EOS Gravity cascading grants, and 15 of those were selected out of the ones that were submitted. And here you can see them. You see the project title on the left, which organization is leading those activities, and in which country it is, and what are they intending to do. So they're either, most of them are either going to become thematic nodes, so involving more countries in the future. This is not the second wave, but this is potentially the third wave, and more thematic nodes as well. Again, in the third wave, so we're talking potentially submitting in 2027. So they have 6 months to prepare their project charters, their project outline, and we expect that the third wave call for further enlargement of the federation will happen around the time of the symposium later this year. Similarly, for the onboarding of new use cases and services, 8 were selected, those 4 services of 4 scientific use cases. You can see on the left the set of the names of those ones, the lead organizations, which country is backing those use cases or services, and which of the existing nodes will those use cases or services be onboarded to. So you see they're all on the far right, they're all the first wave nodes, with the exception of the North Macedonia node, which is a second wave node. So they'll be onboarding at a later stage. And the intention is that these should be able to come finished by October, at least a demonstration of having that service or that scientific use case deployed in the federation. So you can see there's the progressive expansion of the federation, both in terms of number of nodes, number of use cases, and the resources that are foreseen inside them in 2 stages. First of all, the second wave, but then also additional nodes coming, additional use cases and repositories and services, and future third wave nodes are in preparation as well. If we look at all this in terms of a timeline for 2026 across the 3 horizontal lines, the 3 objectives. So we started in January with the winter school, and then there was also the first face-to-face meeting of this new MOU structure. The handbook itself was published after being approved by the tripartite. Now we're starting the deployment of the high priority federating capabilities. So that's the things like the service monitoring, the help desk, and the FITSM service management. So we expect to have the basic operational procedures in place by the end of this month. The submissions have been handled for the expansion and the uptake, and the results have been announced. Now the onboarding will start of those. We expect to have a revised version of the legal framework for production by summer this year. At the end of the summer, we'll have a face-to-face meeting in Karlsruhe between the first, second wave nodes and things like that, and assess the status and our preparation for movement towards symposium, to movement towards production. And then in October, there'll be the symposium, and hopefully shortly after that, we should be able to start the production. So we expect to be able to announce that at the Federation if all goes according to plan. And then there'll be sort of a launch of the third wave of enrollment as well before the end of the year. So I highlighted that the next big event we have for all the whole of the community is the symposium. That'll be hosted in Florence on the 14th to 16th of October. Registration is going to start this spring if it hasn't started already. So reserve those dates in your agenda so you can see how far we've progressed with the development of the federation as well. I did mention as well that we want to put in place a user forum, and we're targeting the symposium as a launch date for doing that, when hopefully we can move towards production. This is because everything we've shown you up till now is really much from the supply side, putting in place the infrastructure, the governance, and so on. But from the use cases point of view, from the end user's point of view, we need to have a user form in place. And the goal behind this is to sort of capture the demand side feedback on the service quality, the usability, getting access to the fair data and so on across the federation, and use that to inform the development and the priorities. In which direction should we go? Getting that feedback from the users, and that would complement the technical input we're getting from the governance bodies, such as the operational part, and the supply side aspects coming from the contributors of the nodes as well. So the composition is we're looking to put in place a user board of active researchers from across the different disciplines and countries that will be used to steer and manage the user forum. And we would also have general user meetings accessible to anybody in the community to ensure inclusivity. We expect that those would primarily be online, but there may be some in-person versions of it as well. And then the outputs, there should be periodic experience reports and prioritized improvement recommendations. What should we work on first in order to make it easier for the users? And as I said, specialized events to help us build the community and capture some of the success stories, and also identify some of the gaps as well. And the reporting line, they'll report to the Node Coordinators Committee so that they will understand what works be needed. And of course, the findings will be shared with the tripartite governance at the top, so that as a way of forming whether or not EOSC Federation is achieving its objectives. So we expect to launch this at the transition to production. Not much point doing it in the prototyping stage at the moment, but once we get to production, we expect to have this user forum in place for that as well. That covers the sort of overview of the federation. From a policy point of view, we want to show you what is more the broader impact for it. I will go through this quickly, but this has sort of been agreed with the tripartite. What are they expecting to see from EOSC, and what they see the added value of it? Well, so first of all, helping us to foster European leadership on artificial intelligence by supporting access to fair data, which is the reduce the data scarcity that can ensure that Europe stays at the forefront with artificial intelligence based on factual data. And also increase the security in research and data management by putting in safeguards for these sensitive resources. You've seen what we've been putting in place with the authorization, authentication, access policies, cybersecurity structures as well. And this will help us in this cross-border, cross-disciplinary collaboration. Similarly, trying to break down the borders so we get this EU single market for knowledge going across all the national borders and disciplines, which would put the European research area on a stronger footing as well. And enhance Europe's global scientific competitiveness. We've only talked about within Europe at the moment, but we want to see if whatever we build in Europe can interoperate with other structures elsewhere in the world to try and help and put in place a global commons of knowledge as well. And then, of course, hoping all this will boost European data economy by also linking with different business sectors, and also working with some of the common European data spaces as well. And then sort of empowering the European values, the idea that we believe in these democratic access to research resources across the whole of Europe, and they're not controlled by individual companies and so on, but keeping us at the cutting edge at the same time. So those are just from the policy point of view. Those are the elements that are being discussed with the funding agencies and the policy bodies. I would highlight as well that the member states and the associated countries have just issued a paper showing the importance of EOSC towards becoming a partnership in the future Framework Programme 10. It's highlighted 10 key points, and I note there as well that they want to entrust the EOSC Association with the coordination of the EOSC Federation and see important commitments from the member states, associated countries. That paper is now online, uploaded on Zenodo in the link you can see there at the bottom The other point is that the Federation has influenced the strategic research and innovation agenda. So we see these questions of data sovereignty and quality of research data are seen as a key focus for the innovation agenda in the future. The links between AI and EOSC are also highlighted there as well, and the user centricity, the work we're trying to do, for example, with the user forum put in that place, is to ensure that user centricity is a key element of the EOSC Federation in the future. And as well as I said, the strategic alignment for global collaboration as well. We know that the disciplines don't stop just at Europe. They go beyond that. We have to see how we can work with the other regions in the future as well. Okay, with that, I think we can stop at this moment and go into sort of question and answer session as well.
Thank you, Bob. So time for questions. We have in the chat a question from Fotish. I think it's more a comment related to the liaison between EOSC and the steering board. Are you able, Fotish, to ask your question, or is just a comment?
Yes, I mean, hi everybody. It was on slide 15, Bob, and
Yeah.
I noticed this also some time ago. I think this is an old figure, and I was always wondering now maybe it's the time to ask why there is no direct link between the association and the steering board. So it goes through the commission, you know. It's a bit a minor thing, but anyway, yeah.
Slide 15. Okay, so that's probably just a mistake in the slide, because if I show you an earlier one, you can see that in this one, there are the links there. So the steering board, the EOSC Association is not an official member, but is often invited as an observer. And then all three parties, so the member states, the association and the commission, participate in the tripartite meetings, which take place every 6 months. The last one was held in Nicosia in Cyprus, which has the EU presidency at the moment. And that's where the decision, for example, was jointly taken about the second wave nodes that have been brought into the Federation, and also agreement that we will have a third wave. And we have to discuss in more detail what would be the priorities for the third wave as well. Yeah. So yeah, it's probably just a bad figure, Fotis. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
There is also a second question in the chat by Peter. I'm not sure I understand it correctly. It is related to the legal. Are we able to make use of EOSC legal for tricky copyright questions? Maybe, yeah.
So at the moment, we don't have help desks set up at the Federation for legal questions. The situation we have at the moment is that we have the MOU, which is the interim structure in place and is a non-legally binding structure. Okay. As we move towards production, we recognize that there are some responsibilities involved. I mentioned data protection, but certainly copyright and so on are also similar areas where there are some responsibilities in place. And in the legal framework, which is being drafted at the moment for use in the production stage of the Federation, we expect there to be some guidance on how the EOSC Federation is positioned with respect to those different legislation. But at the moment, what we're thinking of is that we'll have basic guidelines there as well, and specific roles involved. But I'm not sure we have plans at the moment for a help desk. But that's a legal help desk. We'd have to see who would be capable and competent for putting in place such a help desk as well. Yeah.
There is also a follow-up question by Peter. Bob? I was curious about how our services might raise fun questions that would be helpful to consult on.
Yeah, as I said, I think we will have guidelines and the position of the federation with respect to different legislation. So a lot of the activities going on is understand which European legislation and national legislation is relevant for the EOSC Federation. Okay. As I said before, we will not be taking over, the Federation will not be taking over any legal responsibility for these things. It will happen between the contributors, being the service and data contributors within the nodes, and there will be some recognition of that within the node governance structure itself. But it would be it's a good point is whether or not we should allow or find a mechanism by which there can be sort of cross-node and cross-contributor discussion and consultation on some of these questions as well. It's something to consider for the future. Yes, yeah.
There is also a question by Raul. If there are more specific services onboarding guidelines on nodes than the guidelines on onboarding policies during the EOSC Federation build-up phase, which is something, let me just say here before you answer, Bob, that we have identified as a topic also for the Academy. We are working on it, and it will be one of the upcoming online courses. For now, there is not enough material to develop full training material on this, at least from the Academy point of view.
Yeah, again, this is one of the situations where, remember at the start, we said it's a system of systems and we respect the autonomy of the individual nodes and contributors. So this onboarding is a similar situation. There are some general guidelines at the federation level, but we expect that individually nodes may have more detailed rules for participation that are relevant for onboarding. So, for example, some nodes are very likely to be willing to accept and host commercial services. Some others may not. Okay. So this is something that has to be decided at the node level. It's not something that the federation itself will impose, but we have some basic guidelines. At the moment, for example, in that area, we have that all nodes, the legal body behind a node or hosting a node has to be established in a European member state or a country associated with Horizon Europe, and it has to be of an organization of not-for-profit or of public interest. Okay, that means that we cannot have a commercial organization acting as the host for a node, but doesn't exclude that commercial services can be contributed to a node if the node host agrees. So those are sort of complications we have where we cannot set at the federation level such strict rules, but we put in place guidelines to help ensure we have some consistency.
We have two questions regarding which is what is the date for course 3. Then we can directly reply. So we have a tentative date, but we will confirm as soon as possible. And the tentative date is June 24. However, it's not yet totally decided, just to let you know.
I see the other question from Victoria about the use cases. So we are working with the second wave nodes who were only informed within the last couple of weeks. We're working with them to have more information about each of the nodes to be made available by the EOSC Federation website. So there we expect to see more information about the use cases as well. Okay, I can see a question about the cascading grant projects communicating amongst themselves. So we already, even without an email list, we can say that there is the EOSC forum, which is the online platform, which can be used for communication among parties. I think the email identities has been shared across the coordinators of the grants anyway. So you should have that information available to you now if you're a grantee. Next one I see is what are the recommended paths after EOS Gravity cascading funding? So the first point we say is if it's a inter-project grant, in the preparation for those grants, the grantees were expected to have received confirmation from a host node that would host those use cases or the services. So for us, an important point is to discuss for the grantee to discuss with that host node in which you've already had confirmation to discuss with them, how do you foresee continuing the support for the use case or the service beyond the 6-month lifetime of the project. It is not the intention of EOS Gravity to fund the continued operation of services. All of the nodes themselves have their own funding models in place. Some of them are supported partially by EU projects. Most of them are supported by national thematic in-kind contributions. But it's not something that the EOS Gravity itself is foreseen to cover. Yeah. So for the service monitoring, there's discussions going on amongst the first wave nodes as to the understanding that they should have in place the basic service monitoring infrastructure that would be linked into some federation-wide level. The discussions are going on about what measures or measurements would be taken for each of the services involved and get an agreement about those ones. It will be introduced progressively. It won't be expected to have a mass of service KPIs and data initially. It will be introduced progressively with the nodes in agreement with what they feel they're capable of supporting. Yeah. So Raul is asking that services do not need to be physically onboarded or physically hosted in the node infrastructure. That's correct. We have a number of nodes already which are of a distributed nature, where some of the services are located on different infrastructure, but collectively they form a node and they adhere to the node specific policies and rules of that node. Yeah.